heaven looks like. But the reality is that everything has changed. But unfortunately, for too many of us, nothing has changed. A recent poll was just conducted, and it stated that 1 in 10 African Americans believe that the United States has not achieved most of its goals and objectives of the civil rights movement. 9 out of 10 believe that we've come a long way, but we still have an even further way to go. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm clear in my understanding that no battle for social justice is ever perfect. I'm clear in my understanding that no battle for social justice is ever complete. But I'm also confident in saying that the efforts of Dr. King has had an impact. As I look around at millennial activists, the Black Lives Matters movement, the movement that we see through the LGBTQA community, immigration reform, the movements to change the criminal justice system, the movements to talk about the reality of environmental racism. I see in those movements the impact of Dr. King. And so because I see that, I have hope. Yes. But I do understand that probably now the most prominent issue that we face in our lifetime is that of race relations. Yes, we stand in America that talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We talks about justice for all. But we also understand, as Dr. King said, that even now we live in two Americas. Just say amen when you can. I told folk last night that amen just simply means I agree. If I say something that you agree with, you can simply just say amen. You won't be convicted or converted. You won't fall out of your senses. You won't become a Baptist. I'm just saying, it's all right to say amen. Nothing much will change. Contrary to what President Barack Obama said in that speech at the Democratic Party when he talked about that there's no this America, there's no white America, and there's no black America. And I love Barack, but he was wrong. I love President Obama, but he was wrong. There are two Americas. There's an America for black folk, and there's an America for white folk. There's America for affluent folk, and then there's an America for poor folk. And poor is not black, and poor is not brown, and poor is not red or yellow or white. Poor is simply painful. Amen. There is a difference in belief in this country across race and across community. There are literally two Americas. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. King was totally committed to breaking down barriers. Dr. King understood that we can win, but only if we work together. He went as far as to say that we build alliances based upon necessity and not necessarily desirability. See, Brian has learned that it's important that he's able to reach across the aisle. Brian he realizes that it's important to work with a Republican governor because he's the governor. Folk in our party need to realize that it's important to reach across the aisle in Jeff City because we are the minority. Amen. And we've got to find a common agenda. We've got to find a common goal. That in Jefferson City, we can't just prop up ourselves as Democrats. And we can't just miss others because they're Republican. There's too much at stake. We've got lives at stake. We've got in Kansas City just last night, 2 people shot, 2 people murdered, 14 shot. In St. Louis just last year, we had 190 plus people murdered in the streets of St. Louis just last year. In this country, we've got 3 cities out of 15 cities in the country. Brian, you know that. In the top 15 of African American deaths by way of gun violence. St. Louis, number 1. Kansas City, number 4, and Springfield, number 12, and Columbia, y'all catching up. It is my prayer, I'm not claiming it, but it is my prayer that you'll never get on that list. But Columbia, you're catching up. That's Missouri. That's not Chicago. That's not Detroit. That's not Baltimore. That's not Atlanta. That's not Gary. That's not Cleveland. That is St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, and Columbia's catching up. That's why we don't have the luxury of picking and choosing our friends. We don't have the luxury, Dr. Ruffin, of picking and choosing who we're going to deal with. Black folk don't have the luxury of Democrats and Republicans waiting to get it together. Dr. King understood that. And so he said we must build alliances based upon necessity and not necessarily desirability. He came from a religious background, and he genuinely encouraged others to move beyond their own self-interest. I'm a Democrat. I've been wearing blue for a long time. But I've got enough sense to know that if a Republican governor holds the purse strings that's going to benefit black communities or poor communities, I'm going to do a photo op with the guy that holds the purse string. All right. I'm just saying. I'm just saying, Minority Whip. I'm just saying. All right. I know who's in the room. All right. Dr. King worked to bond people together, to get people to see themselves as part of the same shared struggle. He took steps to organize people into groups and to understand the importance and the power in numbers. And so that's the speech part. So let me get to the preaching part. Because Dr. King was a preacher. I like the speaking part, but I really love the preaching part. I read in your hearing from Acts chapter 11, verses 1 to 5, and this is not going to take that long. As I read through that, the word that came in my mind was tribalism. I'm going to let it sink in. Tribalism is defined as the state or fact of being organized in a tribe or tribes and the resulting behavior and attitude that stems from loyalty to this tribe. See, now don't get me wrong. On the surface, that doesn't sound too bad. You know, people like Deltas like to hang with Deltas. AKAs like to hang with AKAs. Zetas like to hang with Zetas. I don't know what y'all say. Qs like to hang with Qs. Kappas like to hang with Baptists like to hang with Baptists. Amen. So on the surface, that doesn't sound too bad. Human beings naturally migrate into groups of like-minded people. Tribes form around particular hobbies or interests or views or locations. Young folk, they may not use the word tribe. They may say, this is my fam or my crew or my posse. I don't know what y'all say up here. But what happens when tribalism is taken to the extreme? What happens when our individual groups become more important than the common good? What happens when one's loyalty to their tribe takes priority over everything else? Toxic tribalism promotes us versus them mentality. It elevates one's tribe above other groups, saying that my tribe is right and everybody else is wrong. Does that sound familiar? We're living in a political culture throughout this country now where we're dealing with toxic tribalism, where you have somebody that gets up in Congress and says they're trying to take everything away from us. They're trying to take everything away from 32 million of us. They're trying to remove the decision that we made. It's them against us. what creates the Charlottetown. That's the same thing that creates the same mentality that causes somebody to go into a synagogue and shoot people, or into a church and shoots people. That toxic tribalism. Oh, y'all don't want to hear this. And so in the scripture, Peter is coming back from a trip. After his time in Joppa, where he healed someone who was paralyzed, and he raised another one from the dead. And after spending hours of preaching and teaching in areas beyond, Peter came home. And upon coming home, folk weren't happy. Brian, you started this. They didn't seem to care that God had performed miracles through Peter. They didn't seem to have the joy in the number of people that Peter had encouraged to come to the faith. Not simply by words, but by action. What they cared about was that Peter had crossed tribal boundaries, Chief. We got no business talking to the police. That's what protesters say to me. You know, when you're on the front line and things are getting heated, and you've got a police officer, a human being that sees the tension. They feel the tension. They're trying to understand the anger, and they want to reach out and protest and say, Reverend Gray, you can't cross that line. Police are on this side. Protesters on this side. Pastors are in the middle. They say, hey, y'all don't know. You're not allowed, Reverend Gray. You can't associate with those people. People in the church, pastor says, go out and be active. Go into the highways and the byways and go into the bushes. Go into communities that you've never gone into. Go on down there and talk to that man or that woman on the corner mumbling to themselves. Somebody said, no, you can't associate with those people. We don't like them because they're not like us. Toxic tribalism seeks to withhold the blessings to God's people. But that's not God's message. I think about Dr. King, and don't think that Dr. King didn't get the whispers in his ear. Come on now. Dr. King, see, you've got to understand, Dr. King grew up middle-class boy. Down on Sweet Auburn Avenue. His daddy was pastor of one of the bigger churches, Ebenezer. Truth be told, Daddy King was a Republican. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Back then, you did what you had to do. Don't tell on me, all right? Truth be told, Daddy King was a Republican. And in Atlanta, if you know anything about Dr. King's history, there was only one demonstration that Dr. King led in Atlanta. Only one. Because the folk in Atlanta was whispering in Daddy King's ear, and Daddy King was whispering in his son's ear and said, don't rock the boat here in Atlanta. You can take that stuff to Alabama, and you can take that stuff to Mississippi, and you can take that stuff to South Carolina, and you can take that stuff to North Carolina and Louisiana, but don't bring all that stuff up here in Atlanta. I don't know what they say to you up here in Columbia, but don't think Dr. King didn't get the whispers in his ear. You know, there's certain places you can take it and certain places you can't. We don't do that here. When Dr. King was in Selma, right after Bloody Sunday, when Dr. King came back and he stood on the steps of the AME chapel and he said, y'all come. He was talking to white folk. He wasn't talking to black folk. Because black folk were already there. We were already there getting lynched. We were already there getting fire hoses turned on us. We were already there getting the dogs sicked on us. We were already there getting put in jail. We were already there getting beat down. We were already there getting lynched. We were already there getting castrated. Dr. King said, y'all come on down. Dr. King said, y'all need to come and not just see this, y'all need to come and be a part of this. All right. And so he called on white folk and y'all came. 2 plane loads of nuns and priests from St. Louis, from the archdiocese, came down to Selma. And they marched across the bridge. Dr. King said, y'all come. You don't think that there were people whispering in Dr. King's ear, said, don't call them down here. The Freedom Riders. And some of y'all died because y'all showed up. Because y'all understood that we can win, but we can only win together. When Dr. King stood up in the Riverside Church and moved away, preacher talked about it, moved away from the lunch counter and stopped talking about the lunch counter and broadened his voice when he realized that this is not just about black folks sitting at the lunch counter, when Dr. King realized what was really going on in America, and that two Americas wasn't just black and white, but it was haves and have-nots. And when he expanded and he started talking about the Vietnam War, realizing, and I'm a Vietnam era veteran, realizing that those who would stand on the front line would be black and brown and poor white folk. You think there weren't people whispering in his ear saying, Martin, don't do that. That's bigger than us. And Dr. King did it anyway. When Dr. King went the March on Washington, and I tell folk all the time, and I'm getting ready to sit down. You know, Baptist preachers get 3 sit-downs. Think about it just for a minute. If you can mobilize 250,000 people to go to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington for civil rights, think about how many folk you can get to Washington, D.C. when you talk about poor folk. All right. Ooh. Because Dr. King had moved away from that security. Like Peter did. Peter moved out, and Peter realized that we've got to expand this tent. Peter realized that there are people out there that may not look like me. They may not talk like me. They may not walk like me. You know what I'm saying? There are other folk out there. And they need to hear this too. It was working together. It wasn't just black folk on the line that facilitated the signing of the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act or the Fair Housing Act or Equal Opportunity. It wasn't that. It was white folk and black folk and brown folk and Jewish folk and Catholic folk. Come on, Brian, say amen. He understood. Just like we are trying to create that now, we're trying to look back and say, what can we glean from Dr. King's work? And Peter said, the reason that I did this because I was caught in a trance. He was saying I had a dream. Peter said I was caught in a trance, which translates, I had a dream. Amen. That's a Baptist interpretation. All right. Hey. And he said that while he was in this trance, that he saw a sheet being lowered from the heavens. And on that, Peter said that something spoke to him and said that you've got to reach out to somebody. That there's somebody out there that you've got to reach out to. Maybe it's a specific person, someone to whom you need to be reconciled. I don't know who I'm talking to. Maybe it's a group of people, representative of our broken relationships in this world. Maybe it's a place where God wants you to proclaim some good news. Who or what do you see on that sheet that's being lowered from heaven? Is it Muslims? Is it Jews? Is it some tattooed, pierced, body teenager? Is it some unwed mother? Is it some man or some woman on the street corner muttering to themselves? Is it some child with some dirty clothes or a runny nose? Is it a legislator that voted against that thing that was really important? Oh, Lord. Believing that others who do not look like us or think like us or act like us or talk like us or worship like us, that we get caught up in toxic tribalism. But Dr. King said no. Dr. King said that we are interconnected. Dr. King said injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Dr. King said that we're tied together with something. See, that something means something different to everybody. Believing that others who are not like you are not worthy. Believing that others who don't worship like you are not worthy. But believing that others who don't live in the same zip code than you are not worthy. Because they didn't go to the same high school, they're not worthy. Because they're not part of the same group, they're not worthy. Because they're not part of the same political party, that they're not worthy. Oh no. Dr. King understood that we may disagree. Dr. King understood that we will disagree on most things, but there are some fundamental things that we ought to agree on. And that what is in the best interest of humankind? What is in the best interest of humanity? Because if it is in the best interest of humanity, it's in the best interest of me. If we get to that point, and so Peter, and this is because I got to go catch a plane. But Peter realized, Dr. King realized, like Peter realized, like Christ realized. That you've got to move out, y'all. That's the only way that things are going to change in our lifetime. That's the only way that things are going to change in this city. It's the only way that things are going to change in this state. It's the only way